Hello, my name is Kevin Haight. I am a captain with the Idaho State Police. I joined the Idaho State Police back in 1999, so I am approaching almost 21 years of public safety service in the state of Idaho, and it has been a tremendous ride. From the early years of my career, I spent those years down in the Magic Valley of Twin Falls area, where I was a trooper, I was a patrol sergeant, I also was a patrol lieutenant. For many of those years, I was also a certified crash and crime scene reconstructionist. What is a crash and crime scene reconstructionist? It's a specialty for the Idaho State Police where, as you can probably imagine, I spent many years dealing with suicides, homicides, fatality crash scenes, police shootings, those kinds of things. I survived all of that process through a tremendous supportive family, a wife and 3 beautiful daughters, a profound dedication to my personal faith, and a commitment to honor and duty and kind of just the way I was brought up. But in 2013, I found myself at a crossroads in my career where I just felt like I had had enough and needed a change. I needed something different, something new that inspired me and excited me. So I took an opportunity to transfer to being the commander of Idaho State Police's emergency dispatching program, something I never dreamed in my entire professional adult life I would ever do. But it was a profound change for me, and it has led me to a real epiphany or an enlightening about our emergency dispatchers and just how critical they are to the public safety enterprise across this great country. In 2015, after leading that program for about 2 years, I had the opportunity to attend a class put on by Pocatello Police Department. The class title was A Victim's Plea. That class was taught by Mr. Nathan Lee out of South Florida. The story is about Nathan's beautiful young wife, who was 21 years old, when on January of 2008, she was kidnapped off the back porch of their South Florida home while she was cutting their little boy's hair. She was brutally raped, bound and raped for hours, and then subsequently murdered at the hands of a killer who was allowed to complete his dastardly deed because of a tragic, horrific failure of a 911 center in South Florida. And I sat there and listened to Nathan teach that class. And I sat there and said, you know what? I'm the commander of an emergency dispatch program. I have 3 beautiful daughters. I'm a cop. I can never let this happen in Idaho. You know what's so interesting about Nathan Lee's wife, Denise? She was a cop's daughter. Denise's dad was Sergeant Rick Goff. Sergeant Rick Goff worked for that sheriff's office his entire career. As a matter of fact, I've met Sergeant Rick Goff. Sergeant Goff is still working for that same sheriff's office where that 911 center botched that call. And Sergeant Rick Goff will tell you today that his daughter is dead. Yes, the killer committed the dastardly deed, but his daughter is dead because his agency was apathetic to professionalization and standardization and training initiatives and paying their people well in that dispatch center. The dispatcher that botched that call was unfortunately nicknamed by her peers, colleagues of Sergeant Rick Goff, Liability Millie. How prophetic is this? How tragic is this? And how unexcusable this is that public safety disciplines across the United States have been far too apathetic about these kinds of issues for far too long. Let me explain. This year I completed my master's degree where I was assigned to do a research project, and I chose 911. That thesis is published. You will have access to that thesis if you'd like to find it online and read it. But during the course of my research, I learned an awful lot of things that have absolutely changed my perspective about emergency dispatching, and it's what's given me this passion that I share with you today. For almost 24 years at least, some public safety disciplines have been advocating for a national professionalization, standardization, improving the pay, improving the benefits, improving the training of our emergency dispatchers, our first responders. And yet, in far too many places across this country, it keeps falling on deaf ears. What do I mean by falling on deaf ears? In 2020, there are only 12 states in the United States that require a hiring standard for our emergency dispatchers. Yes, you heard me right, only 12. There are only 29 states in our entire country that require basic training standards for the emergency dispatcher. 23 of those states of those 29 states, only 23 of those states require continuing education credits for the emergency dispatch profession. And only 24 states require that an emergency dispatch center utilize emergency dispatching protocols. Emergency dispatching protocols means protocols on how to instruct somebody to deliver a baby, or how to instruct somebody to administer CPR at a restaurant or at a home until the first responders, the field responders, arrive on scene. 24 states require the use of those protocols. The rest do not. We're in 2020, folks. Apathy. I would like to cite just a couple of quotes that were published recently by Police Executive Research Forum, commonly known across this nation with police industries, police discipline, as PERF. The first quote, PERF in 2017 says, and I quote, "Emergency dispatching services are relegated to an subordinate and undervalued discipline. They call for raising the qualifications, developing career paths, and professionalizing operations." Also in 2017, they say, and I quote, "They work long hours, rotating shifts, receive inadequate pay, performing high-stress tasks while receiving little, if any, esteem from other colleagues in the public safety or from the public." That is my profession they're talking about. That's the fire profession they're talking about. The field responder discipline that has been apathetic to this issue of our colleagues, our heroes of the headset, the emergency dispatching profession. Let me move on to mental health. In 2012, Dr. Michelle Lilly conducted research on this issue as it relates directly to emergency dispatching profession. Dr. Michelle Lilly is a graduate of and current researcher at Northern Illinois University. During the course of her research, and I'm going to read a quote from her as well, she found that paratraumatic distress often follows an emergency communications officer who has just handled a high-stress event. And paratraumatic stress can lead to PTSD. Further, in 2018, the National Academy of Emergency Dispatch had a bunch of researchers that also looked into this issue, and they wrote, and I quote, "The job of an emergency dispatcher requires the strategic and complex coordination of emergency personnel under highly stressful, time-intensive conditions. Dispatchers are the first contact between a distressed individual and emergency responders." They go on to say, "The emergency communications officer must remain poised, focused, and in many cases, they do so from one traumatic event to the next, call after call after call. And they rarely, if ever, have the opportunity to gain closure from those events. The National Academy of Emergency Dispatch researchers also posited that the emergency communication officer's exposure to traumatic events is perhaps greater than, did you hear me? Perhaps greater than that of field responders, police, fire, EMS. Why? Because oftentimes they are processing calls for emergencies for police, fire, and EMS, and they are doing this one call after the next after the next. This leads to what they call psychopathology, or the manifestation of behaviors and experiences which may be indicative of mental illness or psychological impairment. Many of you will find this surprising. I certainly did. But did you know that the federal government classifies our emergency dispatch profession as a clerical profession? Yes, as a clerical, a secretarial profession. There was a large effort that was initiated by public safety disciplines across the country back in 2016, 2017 to try to get that changed and move them over to the public safety discipline where police, fire, security guards, even crossing guards are in the same classification as police and fire by the federal government. And there was an effort to get emergency dispatchers moved into that same classification. It failed. And it failed because there is still this systemic belief across our country that these folks sit in a very undervalued, underestimated profession. They're a subordinate profession. They're just secretaries. They're just quote unquote dispatchers. Ladies and gentlemen of the thin blue line and the thin red line, my peers, my colleagues, it is time we stop this. It is time we stop our old insincere arguments for keeping them out of the benefits, the mental health benefits, the pay, the compensation, the retirement benefits. It is time we stop that. We use patronizing words like highly respected, very critical personnel that we need in our discipline, but then we always end it with a comma and a but. And we continue our arguments of why they shouldn't be included in some of the awesome benefits that we receive. They are our first responders. Let's be honest. How many emergency responses have you and I done over the years where by the time we got to the scene, the emergency was essentially over? Who did that? It was the emergency dispatcher that did that. It was the emergency dispatcher that walked somebody through administering CPR or helping somebody that was choking and help them. And by the time we get there, the emergency is over. The car that drives into the lake and it's sinking and the caller frantically calls. It is that emergency dispatcher that helps tell that person, roll your window down. When the pressure equalizes, open your door, exit, get on top of the vehicle. All of those kinds of things. These people are first responders. If they're not first responders, this 21-year veteran has never seen a first responder. I am proud to say that Idaho has actually turned the corner with some of these issues. Me and many of my peers in law enforcement and fire have gotten behind some of these initiatives, and we're seeing positive changes here. For example, on July 1st of 2017, Idaho enacted a law that requires our emergency dispatchers in Idaho, which, by the way, by statute, are referred to as emergency communications officers, a worthy title. But in Idaho in July of 2017, a statute passed requiring them to meet a hiring standard, a training standard, and a continuing education standard. Also, in January of this year, Governor Little, during his State of the State address, while making argument for his budgetary requests for the Idaho State Police, it included adding additional dispatchers to our dispatching program. and he made the direct reference to the emergency communications officer as being our state's first responders. Thank you, Governor Little. And thank you to the Idaho State Police, an agency I'm proud to work for, who has recognized our emergency dispatchers as regional communications officers for my entire career. But there's still work to be done. I'm proud to say that Idaho included emergency communications officers in the recent PTSD bill that changed with regard to work comp. Something else that is not happening in many states across this country, and that's something we can be very proud of. But again, there is still work to be done. There's work to be done on that exact statute and making sure that sunset clause can be removed. There's work to be done on Rule of 80 for our emergency communications officers, something many law enforcement agencies support across the state. There's work to be done with regards to their pay and their benefits, their other benefits, and those kinds of things to make sure that our colleagues, our peers, our heroes of the headset are treated and given the same opportunities as a first responder as I am. Call upon each of my colleagues that work with me in the thin blue line and in the thin red line to continue this trajectory in Idaho, to get on the train of supporting our emergency communications officers and these initiatives in Idaho. It's time we put our money where our mouth is. We talk about how valued these people are. We talk about how critical they are to the provisioning and the administering of public safety. But have we shown it? I submit to you, we are starting to. We're seeing some positive changes, but there's more to be done. And it takes a community to get some of these changes. I welcome your support in joining us and joining these initiatives as we continue to work to move them forward for the emergency communications officer. Look, our emergency communications officers listen to some of the most horrific things you and I could ever imagine. I don't need to go into that today. We all have our stories we can tell. But we need to acknowledge that so do they. And they listen to stuff that you and I wouldn't want to listen to. And sometimes they listen to one after the next after the next. Very soon, because of next-gen 911 technology, they aren't going to be just listening to it. They're also going to be watching it. They're going to be watching those callers that are calling in, reporting what they're going to do to themselves or reporting what they're seeing across the street. They're going to be witnessing that personally. This is the 21st century. This is technology. These are the changes that are coming to this industry. And my discipline, our field responder disciplines need to recognize this and take care of these partners in the provisioning and administering of public safety. Our emergency communications officers listen, they provision, they administer care, and they care for each one of us. I encourage my colleagues and peers across the field responder disciplines, police, fire, EMS, to continue to support our heroes of the headset, our first responders. One of the other ways that we can support our emergency communications officers is by making sure that we stop by and check on them after a critical incident. Make sure that they're included in debriefs or SISMs, those kinds of things to genuinely show them that we understand they also experience traumatic events and they need a mechanism where they can download that information and share with others and process what they've just experienced. And then lastly, to our emergency communications officers across Idaho and across this country, thank you. Thank you for what you do every day. Thank you for doing a thankless job. You get very little thanks from the public. You get very little thanks from our discipline, my discipline. But I want you to hear me today. I recognize how tough your job is. To be frank with you, I probably couldn't do it. Probably most people in my discipline couldn't do it. That's why you're doing it. You are our heroes. You are my hero. I need you to take care of yourself. I need you to make sure that you're getting the help you need as you experience these traumatic events. I need you to recognize that it is okay not to be okay. Why? Because I need you. We need you. Our communities need you. Thank you so much for what you do.